Good evening, everybody. I'm Sharona Bishop, sitting in for the great one, Lou Dobbs tonight. Well, Democrats are panicking ahead of November, of course. There is complete and utter disarray among America's Marxists. Joe Biden is such a disaster that they are worried it will mortally wound the down ballot races for the party. So here's California's Adam Schiff warning about the doom that awaits if Biden is still on the ticket come Election Day. Watch.
On down ballot races if the president doesn't do well.
Is he dragging down ballot races as we speak?
At present, our down ballot candidates in the Senate and House are doing well. They're all ahead. They are running well ahead of the president. But you can only run so far ahead of the president. And so obviously Joe Biden is going to need to consider for his own sake and his own legacy, can he beat Donald Trump? He's the best to beat Donald Trump.
Well, the answer is no. Biden is not the best to beat Donald Trump, and the Democrats darn well know it. So how bad is Biden's decline? Public visitor logs indicate that Parkinson's experts have visited the White House 8 times. When pressed about that by reporters, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre got a little testy. Take a look.
Wait a second.
Eight times, or at least once, in regards to the president specifically.
Hold on a second.
That much you should be able to answer by this point.
Wait, no. No, wait a minute. Ed, please. A little respect here, please. So every year, around the president's physical examination, he sees a neurologist. That's 3 times, right? So I am telling you that he has seen a neurologist 3 times while he has been in this presidency. That's what I'm saying. I am telling you that he has seen them 3 times. That is what I'm sharing with you, right? So every time he has a physical, he has had to see a neurologist. So that is answering that question.
No, it's not.
No, it is. It is. You're
Dr.
asking
Kevin
me.
Kennard, come
I
to the
cannot.
White House
But I
specifically about
also
the
said to you,
condition.
Ed. I also said to you, for security reasons, we cannot share names. We cannot share names.
You cannot
We
share
have to.
names
We have
of
to.
others he would have met with.
We
but
cannot.
You can share names
No.
in regards to if someone came here in regards to the president.
We cannot share names of specialists broadly.
Wow. Well, more brazen lies from an administration that, well, all they do is lie. I've seen that same move from my children stalling while they come up with yet another lie. So the American people know things have gotten so bad, in fact, that Jill Biden is demanding the press stop asking her if her husband will drop out. At a coffee shop in Tampa, she told reporters to not to scream at her about it. They, like most Americans, were just asking questions. But make no mistake, this administration, Biden might be in cognitive freefall, but the people around him are every bit as dangerous as ever. All you have to do is see the imprisonment of Steve Bannon. Dr. Naomi Wolf is not under any illusions about the persistent threat to freedom. Posted by the White House, she wants Americans to remember exactly what time it is. Dr. Naomi Wolf, thank you for joining us tonight. And you've been a huge advocate, a strong supporter, and a frequent guest on the War Room, supporting Steve Bannon and getting your message out there. I know I was so educated following you and listening to all your exposure on COVID. Thank you for sounding the alarm on your incredible article, What Time Is It? So what time is it?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for giving me the chance to talk about it. It's 1933. Basically, my piece was arguing that Steve Bannon's arrest and imprisonment mean much more than a difficult situation for him, which I'm sure he'll weather with his usual kind of courage and resilience and refusal to be intimidated. It's much more serious. It's very serious for the United States and for the rest of us, because what people have got to understand is that we're at that stage of the collapse of a civil society in which it's not enough to debank the opposition, it's not enough to deplatform the opposition, it's not enough to smear the reputations of the opposition, which we've seen happen all the way up to the White House, targeting its critics. And this goes back to 2020, 2021. But now we've reached the point, which is why I say it's 1933, when the regime, and again, we don't even know who's running the United States, given that we have a puppet president, but the regime is taking the bodies of the opposition and mopping up the opposition physically. And so arrest is incredibly significant. And whether it's detention of the kind that Steve Bannon is facing and again, or is enduring, again, it's a total double standard because I was an advisor to Clinton's re-election campaign and to Vice President Gore, and everyone around the president, vice president relied and relies to this day on executive privilege, right? But it's not just a matter of is he being taken into custody? It's a matter of now that's happening, right? And so when you're in custody, the goal is to silence his voice, and that's what's happening. And so I looked at the rules of the prison, and he cannot engage with digital technology at all. He can't record a message for his audience and get it aired at another time. He can't follow the campaign. He can't follow the convention. He's completely shut off from the world of digital communication. And obviously that's the goal of the timing of this sentence, to keep him silent for the next critical 4 months before this life or death election. But it's, again, we've got to understand what it means for everyone else. It means that, okay, now it's going to be the quarantine camps. Now it's going to be detention in hospital where they don't let your loved ones see you and they can do anything to you. And the reason I keep stressing this is I studied the process of how civil societies close, and they close in very formal steps. And this is kind of the last step, the last stage. And in 6 months before the Nazis were formally in power, the SS just rounded up critics, opposition leaders, journalists, editors. I mean, not even Jews and gypsies at that point. It was like, you know, well-known civil society figures, took them into underground basements, beat them or disappeared them, and everyone else went quiet. And within 6 months, there was no more opposition. So that's why, and I promise I'll stop talking in 10 seconds, but that's why the silence, the relative silence from conservatives, from independents, you know, let alone from liberals, at the arrest and incarceration of Steve Bannon is very dangerous, because if we don't speak out now, it isn't going to bypass us. It's going to become worse for everybody.
I mean, we have the situation, I want to come back to Steve Bannon, but we have the situation in Idaho we're talking about earlier, where they're being told they couldn't carry crosses in their Independence Parade. And so they, you know, rebuffed the government and they all carried crosses, which is exactly what you would expect of the American spirit, to say no to government, to put government back in check. The thing about the war room is the war room gave regular everyday people a voice. You know, when something happened to a regular person in this country that was absolutely out of control, government overstepping, Bannon was there to elevate that voice, to bring attention to it, myself included. I've been a beneficiary of his incredible war room posse and what they've done, how they expose and educate the public. He's literally been the general in that army. I couldn't agree with you more. You wrote that you've been warning since 2007 in your book, The End of America, about the 10 steps to fascism. Walk us through, what are the 10 steps to fascism? And I think we'll see the parallels in America.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, these are nonpartisan or transpartisan concerns. I wrote that book in the George Bush era, and he kind of built up violations of liberties that he handed right over to Obama, and then Obama built them up further. And so, you know, it's like everyone likes restrictions on liberty once they're in power, and that's something the American people have really got to understand. So each side stops thinking that partisanship is going to save them, because it isn't. It's just what you said, the grassroots, ground up resistance of everyone that's going to save us, right? But the 10 steps. First step is you declare an emergency, right? You declare a terrifying internal or external threat. And sometimes that can be a real threat that's hyped. For instance, 9/11 was a real threat, but it was also messaged and messaged and messaged to hype it. ISIS was a real threat, but that nature of that danger was hyped and exaggerated. COVID, no doubt, was a real threat, but the numbers were, as we all know by now, artificially inflated. Hospitals were incentivized with $40,000 bonuses for racking up deaths with COVID, and so on. So it starts with a threat or an emergency. Then you create a surveillance society. Then you create a place outside the rule of law, like Guantanamo, or, these basements that the SS would take people, or, the J6 prisoners. Many of them are in high security prisons in which there isn't normal due process of law. And other places recently I can think of that have been like outside the rule of law are this when hospitals don't let loved ones in, or a quarantine camp, right? These are outside the rule of law. Very scary airports are outside the rule of law. There's a place after you leave the plane and before you country where law doesn't apply, and that's where all these illegal invaders, we don't know who they are, being housed in a couple of airports. But moving on, you create a thug caste, so like militias that intimidate people, threaten people. You then move on to creating, calling criticism treason or espionage, cracking down on freedom of speech, creating kind of third rails, that things you can't say, points of view you can't hold.
The verbiage that they've used is this: we're coming against democracy. I mean, that's been a term they've used over and over and over. You were coming against democracy by pointing out all of the frailties with the COVID processes and procedures that they were utilizing. So anytime that you're in opposition to the government, it's considered a violation of democracy. That's their verbiage there. Okay, please keep going.
Well, I mean, exactly, but beware. It's like, that's just insulting, right? But that's a slippery slope to subversion or terrorism, right? And so now you're moving. You see this, like every administration has been doing this since the early 2000s. But during Bush era, environmentalists were terrorists. Now it's like people praying outside abortion clinics are terrorists, or people waving American flags, or are white supremacists that are terrorists, right? So there's that slippery slope to criminalizing speech. And then you kind of move ahead to the 10th step, which is emergency law. And that's, as of June of 2020, here in New York State, we were told we were under emergency law. And I believe federally, we're still under emergency law. They keep extending it and extending it. Last time it was extended was in May. And I believe racism or the crisis in Iran was were the last two pretexts for extending emergency law in New York State and federally, respectively. But once you have emergency law, you have the kinds of things that we saw during lockdowns, in which normal law doesn't obtain, and all these illegal things can be done, like false imprisonment, lockdowns, like closing businesses, illegal, like mandating interventions, also medical interventions, which is also unlawful according to international law, the Nuremberg Code, and so on. But all of that is out the window once you have emergency law. With emergency law, the person in charge can do whatever they want. And that's why this combination of Bannon in prison, emergency law, and millions of people who look like soldiers coming over the border is so unbelievably dangerous. Because if tomorrow the president, or whoever's running the president, which we don't know, wants to say, okay, these 500,000 Ukrainians are actually Ukrainian soldiers, and we're opening these FEMA camps in 50 states, and we've got a list, and they're going to go door to door and, take the critics, or take the unvaccinated, or whoever they want to take, really, MAGA, they can do that. Like, there's literally nothing stopping you once you're in a state of emergency law. And once you have that really important step 4, which is the thug caste, which I'm going to argue, do have with these cartels and gangs and, military type groups flowing in over the border by the millions.
It's really alarming, the scenario that you're painting. How do we know this is not hyperbole? FEMA camps, quarantine camps. How do we know this is not just shock and awe?
Yeah, I get a little, I mean, I know that's a rhetorical question. I appreciate it. But generally, I get kind of exasperated at this point when this is raised, because you don't, right? You don't. But our founders said that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. So if it doesn't happen, that these 450,000 Ukrainians include some bad people, or that the millions who may or may not be linked to cartels you know, if they all turn out to be absolutely fine, nonetheless, they're here illegally. But if it turns out that the quarantine camps are never activated, and you've figured out that it's possible and you defend against that, for instance, the way Bobby Ann Mason, I beg your pardon, Bobby Ann Cox, the lawyer, did by appealing the decision to open quarantine camps in New York State. If all you do is defend liberty against these possibilities, you're doing what our founders asked us to do. Like right now, these are all possible, right? Nothing stops it. Now, the other thing I would say to you is, look at what I've been saying for the last 2 years and where we are now, right? Steve Bannon is in prison. Peter Navarro is in prison. The opposition leader, you know, is a convicted felon, right? Right out of a banana republic. Our president is demented, and no one knows who's running the United States of America. Mark Stein, you know, lost his career and lost his reputation because that nation, the United Kingdom, decided to destroy, you know, Ofcom, the government censor, decided to destroy his reputation, you know, and mine, and you know, millions of people are injured. A million, according to Ed Dowd, 1 million join the ranks of the disabled by their own description every month in the United States of America. Thousands are dead. You know, lawsuits are targeting, civil and criminal lawsuits are targeting the people who rolled out this mandated injection that I've been screaming about since 2020. And I lost my own career and reputation in trying to warn people about it. All the things I've been warning people about, I've been warning people about food disruptions of the food supply. We have disruptions in the food supply. I've been warning people about cyber attacks. We have cyber disruptions. I've been warning people about, you know, these people coming in over the border. We have absolute chaos. I can't even go into Brooklyn, you know, where I have loved ones, because there's like a football field full of people who cannot be identified, who are causing such high levels of crime on the streets that no one feels, young women in my family don't feel safe on the streets anymore. You know, I'm the daughter and granddaughter of immigrants. This is not an anti-immigrant sentiment. It's saying law and order has been completely disrupted in our country. All these things I've been warning about as part of the march to fascism, the march to tyranny, have happened. So I really, you know, if people want to sit on their couches and click the channel and decide that it's hyperbole, that's up to them. But, you know, my family and I are freer and stronger and healthier because we've been trying to strategize against the worst case scenario, you know, just as our founders asked us to do. And honestly, I don't, like, at this point, I don't have any patience for those people, because, you know, it's like, sauve qui peut, as they say, you know, save he who is able to be saved. Like, we're in a real emergency, and I'm just tired of the dead weight of people not helping, you know, not recognizing, not waking up where we're at.
Well, and acting like we all didn't know Biden was already inept, acting as though the things we see with our very own eyes are not already happening. These are things that are evident, they're obvious, and the gaslighting that comes from our representatives, from Congress, from MSM, all of that plays a part of this. The fact that you mentioned with Steve Bannon, that people should realize, even though it's not you sitting in prison right now, you should be joining the ranks right now, screaming and hollering. Wrap it up with me. What should every American purposely be doing right now to help save our country with you?
It's a good question, because things are so serious. Well, I think immediately they have to secure their homes. So, you know, make sure you have food supplies, make sure you have water supplies, make sure you've printed out all your documents that, you know, record your assets, because we haven't even talked about economic collapse. I'm learning to shoot. I think everyone needs to know how to defend themselves physically. I'm speaking peacefully. Women, you know, women especially need to know how to defend themselves peacefully. You need to not comply, right? That's the most important thing. If exactly your example you started with, if you're told not to fly the flag, fly the flag. If you're told not to show a cross, you know, act like Americans and raise your voice. I mean, so many people are silent because they don't want to lose clients, or they don't want to be not invited to the potluck. You know, we're so past that. It's very powerful when people just raise their voices and say what they think within their own circles of influence. So those are things I would say just now.
Dr. Naomi, well, thank you so much again for joining us and your incredible work and really just the permission you've given women. We've talked about this before to continue to be loud and vocal about what we see with our own eyes. We are the protectors of our children, and hopefully we're going to play a major role in helping to secure this great country again. Thank you so much. When the government of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, banned crosses from its Independence Day parade this year, Christians were undeterred. Their resolve to show up in force for that special day forced local leaders to humiliatingly reverse that policy at the very last minute in the face of outcry. Here's what Independence Day looked like in Idaho. When people raise their voices, they are heard and they can win. Joining us now to discuss is Matt McCaw, a spokesperson for the Greater Idaho Project. Matt, thank you so much. Give us the background on this. I cannot imagine anybody trying to tell Idahoans what to do.
Yeah, well, so the Greater Idaho movement is a movement that's born out of a similar problem where we have these elected leaders that don't have the same value system. They don't represent what the people that they're supposed to be representing are actually wanting them to do. So our movement is a group in Eastern Oregon that is trying to join fellow Idahoans and fellow people that share our beliefs and value sets, and get the kind of governance that the state government of Idaho provides, that would better match people of Eastern Oregon and better match the constituents.
So walk us through exactly what happens. You have this parade, and Corleone is a very wealthy area. I do know that about that area. I also know that there's a lot of very religious people in that area. We have a lot of Mormons, a lot of Christians. I just can't imagine they thought they could tell them not to bring crosses and why that even became an issue in the first place.
Yeah, well, again, so I'm not sure that I can speak to exactly what the city commissioners or council was thinking in a situation like this. What I can tell you was that it is great to see the people of Idaho and the people of Coeur d'Alene stand up and say, this doesn't match our values. This doesn't match what we want for our community. And we're going to push back, and we're going to make sure that our elected leaders are listening to what we, the people, want.
From your understanding, though, this is a red state. Idaho is a red state. I guess I'm just trying to get to the crux of the matter. What is it? I understand that their values aren't lining up with the elected officials, but this is truly a red state. We were there at the largest 4th of July display west of the Mississippi there in Idaho Falls. And I mean, it's very evident this is a patriotic state, a patriotic people. And to tell people they can't exercise their basic fundamental rights of religion, expression of religion at a parade that was to honor, our independence just seems extremely out of touch. And I can't imagine the people allowing that to happen. So how does this sort of thing go on in a red state? I mean, they are pushing back, like you said, that's great. But what is initiating this in the first place? Do you think these people are really being elected? Or is this just kind of a bait and switch? You think you get one thing and you obviously have something completely different?
Well, I think, again, I think that what we see as conservative people, and you're right, Idaho is a very red state, and it votes very conservatively, and up and down, all over Idaho, they're electing conservative people and wanting a certain kind of governance. One of the problems we see as conservative people on the right is that oftentimes we elect people and we think they're going to go in and advocate for the beliefs and the value systems that we want, and then they get into office and we seem surprised by their actions. There tends to be kind of elected leaders kind of tend to drift left from what we thought we were electing. So this is a problem that's not isolated to Idaho. It's a problem that we have on the conservative side of the aisle all over the place. And movements like ours and movements like what you saw happen up in Coeur d'Alene over the weekend are going to be instrumental in making sure that those elected leaders do carry out what their constituents want, do advocate for what we're believing, and instead of going to their elected offices and drifting leftward and implementing policy that we don't want.
What was the motivation for the Greater Idaho Project to begin in the first place? Was there a catalyst that happened, or was it just a series of events?
Well, our movement got started in 2019, and then it really took off with COVID. And what we saw in Eastern Oregon the people of Eastern Oregon are very conservative. They vote overwhelmingly Republican. They match the values, the belief systems, and the politics of the people of Idaho. And really, Eastern Oregon should be part of Idaho. It's similar geographically, similar culturally, and similar politically. So what we saw, our movement was gaining steam. There's always been this urban-rural divide in the state of Oregon. But what we saw during COVID especially was that giant mismatch with really overwhelming negative impacts on people, where you had government, you had elected leaders that were implementing policy that the people didn't want. And we saw that in Eastern Oregon. The people of Eastern Oregon didn't want any of the policy that was coming out of the west side of Oregon. They didn't want school lockdowns. They didn't want, businesses closed, mask mandates, vaccine mandates. They didn't want any of this, but these policies were being forced on them. And so they looked next door to a state like Idaho, which is a very conservative state and had much different COVID policy. And it just makes sense. We would want that kind of government. We should have that kind of government. Let's move this invisible line to the Cascade Mountain Range, that the people of Eastern Oregon can join with the people of Idaho and have governance that makes sense for us.
Well, so is there real talk about a possible secession from Oregon? Is that kind of what the conversation is? I know in the Midwest, where we're having challenges like this, we're talking about Colorado. There's North and West that are wanting to join Utah and Wyoming. Is this a potential reality?
Absolutely, it's a potential reality. So these are invisible lines. State borders are just invisible lines that were placed on a map. In our case, between Oregon and Idaho, 170 years ago, it was placed there at that time. It may have made sense at that time, though that's debatable as well. It no longer makes sense. It's artificially separating like-minded people and culturally similar people, Eastern Oregonians and Idahoans, and it's forcing Eastern Oregonians into this association with Western Oregonians who are very, very different from them and have a completely different value set and worldview than we do. So there is a process for changing state lines. State lines have changed multiple times throughout the history of the United States. And it's a political process that can be done. We've been going over the last 4 years and asking voters in Eastern Oregon counties, do you want your elected leaders to move this forward, to look into changing the border so that Eastern Oregon could join Idaho? We're 13 for 13. Voters in 13 counties in Eastern Oregon have said, yes, this idea makes a ton of sense. This would solve problems, and we want our elected leaders to do it.
Wow. So what is the consensus on that with the leaders? Are they interested in voting on this? Are they interested in moving forward, or are they going to just let this lie on the people?
So again, this goes back to the very start of our conversation, where you have elected leaders that aren't necessarily representative of what the people want. So we are a very popular idea. Out here in Eastern Oregon, we're 13 for 13, and we win handily. Most of our votes aren't close. We are very popular even in Western Oregon. Your typical voter understands Eastern Oregon and Western Oregon are nothing alike. They vote completely differently. They have differing ideas on almost every issue that there is. It doesn't make any sense for these two groups of people to be fighting over a state government and trying to force policies on each other. So it's a popular idea. It's popular in Idaho. We have had less success convincing our elected leaders, especially in the state of Oregon, to take up and advocate for what the people are asking for. And so, like I said, it goes back to this, what we were talking at the very beginning. We have clearly what voters say, what the citizens say. We want this to happen. We want our elected leaders to pursue this, but for whatever reason, there's this disconnect between our elected leaders moving forward on it and what voters are clearly saying they want. So our job is we continue to get out here on shows like this and advocate for citizens to take action, for citizens to contact the representatives and their senators and their elected leaders and get them going, get them advocating for what we actually want, what actually reflects the values of the voters.
Well, fundamentally, I can see that representation is not going to want to move this forward because they potentially could lose enough people that it changes how many they get to have in Congress. There's a lot of how much money they're getting from the federal government. They have a lot of reasons to resist what you guys are doing, but it is a popular idea that is sprouting out all across the country as you have unreasonable large cities that dictate for the rest of the state how that state is going to go. And with that, have you guys discussed the potential of an electoral college also in Oregon when it pertains to state elections?
Yeah, so we would love to do something like that. There was a time in our past where every county in Oregon had a state senator, and that changes the dynamic, because then all of a sudden rural peoples have more representation, they have more say in their state government. That was done away with decades ago by a Supreme Court ruling, and it's not likely to come back at this point. So we need to find better solutions. You're right, Sharona. We have cities that have kind of one value set, one belief system, and it's completely opposite of what the people in rural areas want. So we need to find some solutions rather than this polarization and just this back and forth and all this political tension. Let's find some peaceful political solutions to solve these problems. Get people government that makes sense for them, lower the political tension. One of the things we always say as part of Greater Idaho, we didn't create this divide. We didn't create the geographic separation or just the polarization that's happening in our country. We're coming along and we're saying it exists, it's here. Let's find some ways to lower that tension and get people government that makes sense for their communities. If Portland in Western Oregon wants to have a certain kind of government, let them. But when people in Eastern Oregon who are similar to the people in Idaho want to join with them and get their governance, we need to make that happen as well.
Well, it only takes one, and the domino starts to fall across the country. I wish you the absolute best, Matt McCall. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. If you thought that censorship was receding, guess again. The State Department's Global Engagement Center is using your dollars to, quote, counter foreign propaganda and disinformation. Well, in a nutshell, you are subsidizing the government's efforts to collude with social media companies to suppress conservative news and information. In other news, the French elections have put the country on a trajectory towards communism. And that is not hyperbole if you're following this. The victorious left wing wants to implement a 90% tax rate on the wealthy. It's also promising to increase and streamline immigration. France seems to have just committed suicide. Turning now to a deal that you do not want to miss. All of you out there know that Mike Lindell and MyPillow no longer have the support of their big box stores and shopping channels like they used to. They have been the victims of cancel culture. So they want to pass their amazing savings directly on to you. They are continuing the $25 extravaganza. When Mike Lindell started his company, it was a problem solution, single product company. But now, you guys, he has hundreds of items that you need to go check out. During this extravaganza, you can shop for his beach towels, the MyPillow sandals, just $25, 6-pack towel set, $25, and the 4-pack dish towels, which I absolutely love, by the way, are just $25. Now, for a limited time, you're going to receive Mike's movies absolutely free, also with any size purchase. It's so important to support American manufacturing and great American patriots like Mike Lindell. You can go to mypillow.com, use the keyword Dobbs, and get your shopping done there. And then you also can call 1-800-977-9152, talk to one of the amazing employee owners, and make sure to use promo code Dobbs, DOBBS. And don't forget, join Lou on his podcast, The Great America Show, each and every day. In a very surprising move, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar of Minnesota has swung her full support behind Joe Biden. Although she has criticized Biden's approach to the Israel-Hamas war, the squad member said that Biden is her man this year. Well, Omar also indicated that the opposition to Biden is crumbling, relegated to just a few outliers. We'll see about that. If Donald Trump wins, it will only be the beginning of the fight. What awaits him is a swamp that will not allow itself to be so easily drained. Mark Moyer, a senior political appointee at the U.S. Agency for International Development, he documented this corruption in his new book. It's called The Masters of Corruption. This is going to be a must-read for all American citizens. This is how the federal bureaucracy sabotaged President Trump's presidency, and I guarantee you they're going to try to do it again. Mark, thank you so much for joining us on Lou Dobbs Tonight. What a story and what an experience that you've had uncovering this incredible swamp that everybody talks about. You're exposing it firsthand in your new book. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Hey, it's great to be with you.
So give us the rundown. I mean, we've heard the rumors about the deep state swamp that was working against him. Kind of give us the overview of what your story is about and what you uncovered.
Yes, well, I was a senior appointee at the Agency for International Development. And so this is a story of what it's actually like in the federal agencies where the work is getting done, because a lot of the attention is focused on the White House. But When the policy is actually implemented, it's in the federal agencies. And in many cases, and in our case, the White House wasn't fully informed of what was happening. And so when I got there as a political appointee, one of the first things I noticed was that a lot of the career bureaucrats were doing things without the knowledge of the White House. And in some cases, were actually trying to conceal those activities because they knew they would be objectionable to the White House.
Well, so here's the thing. I love this quote from Tucker that I want to just share with everybody. In the United States, you can elect any president you want, but a small group of people you've never heard of still run everything. Year after year, administration after administration, that is not democracy, it's oligarchy. And you, Mark Moyer, explain exactly how it works. If people are so petrified about Biden being in the White House, but what you're saying is that it doesn't matter. There is a group there that is in charge. And the presidency is really just a figurehead until President Trump. What was the difference with President Trump different than previous administrations?
Yes, well, in any administration, you have bureaucrats who think they're smarter than everyone else. And so they're going to actually make the policy, even though they weren't elected to do that. But it's magnified in the Trump presidency because you have a very large percentage of the workforce, 95%, in fact, in 2016, that voted against the president or contributed money to Hillary Clinton. So you've got, on top of the natural bureaucratic tendency to try to control things, you have people who are actively opposed to what he's trying to do. And so the certain issues that were important to the White House and things like rolling back Obama policies in areas like climate change and transgenderism, these people went out of their way to try to keep the Obama policies in place. And Donald Trump came in promising that he was going to change the way Washington does business and drain the swamp. And in some cases, he was able to do that. But mainly because of personnel problems, he wasn't able to do it in a lot of cases. And in our agency, was one of those where you had people who were really swamp creatures put into senior political appointee positions.
So when you brought this forward and you showed the Trump administration what was going on, what happened to you?
Well, the first time I reported something was concerning Syria, and there was humanitarian assistance programs of a questionable nature that had been held over from the Obama period. And so the career bureaucrats were talking about how they were going to try to hide those. And I managed to be at a meeting where they discussed that. And this is, again, partly because they were slow in staffing up. People almost forgot who was in charge. So I reported that up the chain of command within the agency, and nothing happened. So that was one of the indications of what was wrong. Then I reported corruption involving my own deputy and several other individuals, which involved a criminal conflict of interest. Now, they said they were going to do some things on this. They ultimately forced this deputy out of the agency, but he then goes and takes a position in the Defense Department. In the meantime, I get accused of publishing classified information and am not allowed due process. They refuse to tell me what I supposedly did. And in fact, after I leave, my security clearance gets restored, and then they come after it again with no due process. And so I'm now in court 5 years after the fact, still trying to clear my name because they still won't tell me what supposedly I did, which is a trick that's commonly used to sabotage people.
Well, I mean, you were a whistleblower. You're exposing this bureaucracy and just helping the American people to understand, well, Trump at that time, but now us, we the people, to understand that the presidency has been a lot of just a figurehead. What do you think it really is going to take to drain the swamp? You've got some serious ideas about this, again, outlined in your book. I really want to encourage everybody to get this. We have to understand what has been happening in order to know where we need to go to fix it and how we're going to fix it. And then to have the grit and the courage like you've displayed, Mark, to see that through. What do we need to see happen?
Yeah, one of the first things that has to be done is to get the right people in agency leadership positions. As I mentioned, we had the #2 person in my agency, Bonnie Glick, was married to the top lobbyist for our agency's contractors, and she was just a disaster, and she actually contributed to my termination. And we saw other people like Rex Tillerson, James Mattis, who weren't on board. And so getting the right people in will do a lot to actually helping push the president's agenda in the agencies. Now, the other things that can be done, a lot of this requires congressional action, trimming budgets, cutting the number of bureaucrats, and changing the rules on what can be used to fire people, because right now it's so hard to fire career bureaucrats that the best you typically do is push them off into some corner where they're not doing much, but you still then are paying taxpayer money for these people to do essentially nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of helps us to understand a little bit too of what was going on in the Trump administration. President Trump did face some backlash on some of the promises he wasn't able to keep. But what you're explaining is there was so much resistance against him doing exactly what he said for the American people. He's a doer. He gets stuff done. It helps to explain what was going on there. After we drain the swamp, then what happened? So we replace the bad people with the good people. I guess actually, Mark, how do we know who are the bad people? We rely on ones like you who've been whistleblowers who can help guide the president.
Yes, well, a big part of the problem in 2016 was that there hadn't been a lot of preparation done on personnel, and it was put initially in the hands of Chris Christie, who didn't do a good job at, and they belatedly realized he had put a lot of establishment people on his list, some of whom had voted against Trump. And so what's happening this time through the America First Policy Initiative, Heritage 2025, and others have spent the last few years trying to come up with people who have what it takes. And it is a pretty robust set of skills you need. I mean, you have to be competent. You also have to be on board with the president's agenda, and you have to be willing to take risks and not worry if the media is going to come after you, because we know the media will attack officials who are actually doing their job. And one other thing I would highlight too, in terms of what can be done, is fixing the inspector general system. I also ran into this when I tried to file a whistleblower retaliation complaint. These are the people who are supposed to be protecting us from waste, fraud, and abuse. But in many cases, they're actually involved in the waste, fraud, and abuse. And it wasn't until 2020 that Trump started firing some of these people. So I think they'll be more attuned to it this time. But it really wasn't until 2020, the first time, that a lot of the personnel issues were addressed.
That is incredible to hear. I think of people like Jeff Clark, all these things that have happened to those who are closest to the president, who are helping to guide him to do the right thing, to see their lives be destroyed like this. How have you recovered personally?
Yeah, well, it is, getting fired immediately without due process and no recourse. It is a big shock, and a lot of people, a lot of whistleblowers especially, suffer a lot of psychological trauma. I mean, I think I was blessed to have a strong family, also strong faith, and I also had an identity separate from politics. I mean, I've been writing books before this, particularly on the Vietnam War, so I had something to turn to. But it was also for a while hard to get employment because of what they were doing with my security clearance. I mean, fortunately for me, I now have a great job at Hillsdale College teaching history, but for a lot of people, it can be very difficult, especially mid-career, to be thrown out of your field and have to incur huge legal fees. And they never charged me formally with a crime, and they tried to do that. I think somebody said, "Well, there's not evidence here," but we've seen, of course, people like Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro thrown in jail, while Merrick Garland, who does the same thing and ignoring congressional subpoena, gets off scot-free.
I mean, the bias is obvious. We see what they're doing, the hypocrisy here, but it really takes special character and a special strength to be able to do what you've done. It's so rare. We don't see that many people standing up for what's right anymore. We see a lot more going along, which is a lot while we're in the situation we're in here in America. Your book, Masters of Corruption, How the Federal Bureaucracy Sabotaged the Trump Presidency. I encourage everybody to go out and get a copy. Mark, thank you so much for being with us today. New York leaders are facing backlash after Mayor Eric Adams' administration distributed thousands of prepaid debit cards to illegal aliens. Apart from stealing from taxpayers, all this policy accomplishes is encouraging more illegals and more illegal immigration. Who would not want to come to America if they knew they had free money waiting for them? Councilman Robert Holden, a Democrat, said the gravy train for illegals must stop. But Holden should know better. His party sees these people as its electoral future. The train cannot and it will not stop for that very reason. Well, and here to talk to us more about the border and what's been happening there in real time is Victor Avila. He is a retired ICE special agent, author, and quite a spokesperson for the people there in Texas who have been dealing with the unbelievable surge of illegal immigrants. Thank you so much for being with us, Victor.
Great to be with you, Shauna.
Well, so you just returned from the border, of course, and you've been such a proponent on the problems that are happening there that are not having any solutions. Nothing's really being done. What's happening now?
Well, the cameras are away from the border, but the chaos is not. I just got back from El Paso, Texas, far west El Paso and southern New Mexico, and I visited that area with Border Patrol. And let me tell you, it's the wild, wild west over there. It's cartel land is what it is. Gotaways. It's 100% gotaways over there. There's no one turning themselves in. As a matter of fact, I personally witnessed illegal aliens all dressed in black running through the brush, trying to avoid Border Patrol. I saw one jump the 30-foot Trump wall and slide down from it. I'm telling you, it is crazy out there. We found a fully loaded Glock magazine, fully loaded with bullets and hollow point bullets in it, inside one of the backpacks that assumably belonged to an illegal alien, amongst all the illegal alien clothing that they leave behind. So they're bringing weapons, they're bringing drugs. There is a lot of activity that is not being reported. By the way, that the numbers are not being reported. You know, the left is saying right now, and the Democrats, oh, look at the big reduction in numbers. And it's true, the numbers have come down, but it's because of a lot of different factors. And the ones that are the numbers that they're not telling about, that are not counting, is giving them the reason to say that. And so one of those is obviously the gotaways that have increased dramatically since Biden came up with this 2,500, illegal alien per day. That, by the way, it never hit the threshold since it went on and the policy came on board. They actually has never met that, and I'm not surprised by that. It was never going to happen. And so what happened is, I'll tell you who shifted. The cartel shifted, everybody else shifted, and now are bringing in the people completely undetected. Another thing is that the Biden administration is sending people very different ways. The CBP1 app continues very strongly to be used, and they're walking through our port of entry legally as with this permit that is completely illegally issued by the Biden administration. We got hundreds of thousands coming in that way, and they're still flying in directly from their home country, from airport to airport into Miami, New York, and many other airports. All of those are not counted, and so therefore those numbers did come down. Another reason why is because the Biden administration, if you remember, met heavily with the Mexican administration back in December, and they made this deal because they Mexico went through Mexican presidential elections last month. And obviously they kind of said, scratch my back and I'll scratch yours, with this problem that they know exists that is probably keeping them from getting elected. The same thing in Mexico. And in Mexico is they really wanted to stay in power, and they did. As a matter of fact, it's even worse over there. They elected a full communist over there. That's what we have next door to our country. This is the reality of what's happening at the border. And you're going to continue, unfortunately, I hate to say this, but it's so true. You're going to continue to see cases of illegal aliens committing crimes against U.S. citizens and their own community in this country. You've heard about the high-profile cases of Jocelyn in Houston and Lake and Riley and those, but let me tell you, there are thousands more unnamed that continue to be victims at the hands of these people every single day.
Victor, the Democrats are saying that they're finally concerned about the border and they're finally going to do something about it. I'm watching some of the farthest left Democrats, governors in the country, saying we support Biden's border plan. What is the border plan? Can you back up just a little bit on the I believe it's CBPI app, so people understand what that is and how they've been able to fake the numbers now? These are people that they're saying they are aware are here, so therefore they don't have to count them.
That's correct. And that border plan that the Democrats talk about is a horrific plan, by the way. It's the one that they came up on the Senate side. That would have been a minimum of 5,000 per day. That's just one part of it, and I'll leave it there. It's a disastrous plan. I don't know. It has nothing to do with actual border security. But this is the part. CBP One app is an app that is on your phone that the illegals have on their phone, and download it, put all their information in, whatever information that they want. Is not vetted by the federal government, is not vetted by Border Patrol, because they're not allowed to vet this. And so we have individuals putting this information in, and they're walking in with a valid, what they think is a valid permit via our ports of entry, and they're coming in. And they're not counting them as illegal. As a matter of fact, these people think that they're completely legal, that they might even be allowed to vote in certain states. Chicago is issuing them driver's licenses based on this documentation. As you know, I've told you on this show before, they're allowed to fly on commercial airlines without any identification, something you and I cannot do. But if you're illegal, you could do it. And the movement of children and the trafficking, that continues as well.
With talking about the southern border, what about the northern border? What have you heard about what's happening there? We've got a socialist above us, a communist below us. They don't give two cares about what happens to America right now.
The northern border has become very active, especially it usually does in the summer months anyway. But this is what is unique about the northern border right now, is that the people that they're encountering up there are Mexican nationals. And that's right. You heard that right. They're not encountering the Mexican nationals down at the Mexican-Texas border, Arizona, New Mexico, or California, because the Mexican nationals and Central Americans are being sent back by Border Patrol under this administration. They're not being deported. And I want people to understand that the terms here and the words do matter. A deportation is very different than someone that is returned. And now the Biden administration says that, oh, the Biden administration has deported the most people. No. It's not deportations. Voluntary returns or sent back is very different than actual deportation. So the Mexican nationals said, okay, you're not going to allow me to come in through here. I'm going to come in through Canada. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're coming in through our northern border. And a lot of them are either prior convicted felons that have been deported prior from our own country, and also have either some affiliation with cartels or some kind of a criminal history. And we're not being able to know because these are gotaways. We're not counting them, and they're coming in completely undetected.
So just to be clear, Victor, for everyone who's watching, the southern border, the northern border, they're completely open. Nothing has gotten better, and the influx of illegal aliens has not slowed down.
That's 100% correct. Some of the numbers have shifted here and there. One of the things I will mention is the numbers that have increased of people from all over the world, from China, Eastern Europe, Africa. Those numbers are skyrocketed through California and Arizona. I was in Arizona last month, and that's the number one area of the gotaways. That's where they come in. There's an area there called Fentanyl Freeway, because that's where the fentanyl comes in. We are being invaded with the fentanyl, the drugs, the crime, and we're seeing it in our neighborhoods now. We are seeing it in our gas stations, at our grocery stores, at these encounters with police. And people have to understand that this was going to happen. I mean, we said this. I mean, you allow people that come from a different culture, a culture that doesn't interact with police the same way that we do. They interact police by shooting at them, because that's the way they were brought up to deal with them. And that's what we're having to deal with here in our country.
Victor, thank you so much. We're on a hard break. Sounds like everyone needs to keep their head on a swivel. It's not getting safer here in America. Thank you for being with us again. Always good to see you. Turning now to a deal that you don't want to miss. All of you out there know that Mike Lindell and MyPillow no longer have the support of their big box stores or shopping channels the way that they used to. So they've been a part of a major cancel culture. They want to pass the savings directly on to you now. They are continuing the $25 extravaganza, because when Mike started this business, it was a problem solution, single product company. And now, well, he has so many products you probably aren't even aware of. This $25 extravaganza gives you the opportunity to try out the beach towels, the 4-pack dish towels, 6-pack towel set, and so much more, all for just $25. Now, for a limited time, you're also going to get Mike's movies free with any purchase. And there is a huge array of those. You might not be aware how much he has vested in some of the great films that have come out the last couple of years. So you'll see all of these offers at mypillow.com. Use the code Dobbs, DOBBS. You can also phone in at 888-977-9152. Use promo code Dobbs and speak to one of the amazing employee owners who keep this business going. Remember, support American manufacturing, support our great patriots, use code Dobbs. And join us on the podcast, Lou Dobbs Podcast, every day, The Great America Show. Thank you so much for being with us today. I know you're missing Lou. He'll be back soon, but thank you for joining me this evening. We will see you tomorrow at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central. Good night to all of you, and God bless.